Hey guys, and welcome to my best of 2018 here in Faeria, and I am going to be covering my top 10 cards, my top 5 decks, and my top 5 players. It was tough to compile these lists, but I finally done it, and I'm going to share it with you right now. So let's get straight into it. We're going to cover my top 10 cards. Alright guys, to kick things off at number 10, we have Hunt Down from the Fall of Everlife. Now, when this card came out, it really did shape the meta because we had a green-blue beast deck that was incredibly dominant during the release of this card and actually to get nerfed. So currently it's at 2 forest, 2 wild, but before then it was only 3 lands, 2 forest, 1 wild. And that made some very early removal plays. A lot of the beasts in the game have high life, so turn 3 you could have your Deepwood Grizzly or your Grove Guardian, and it could maybe 2 for 1 or maybe take something out from across the map. So it was a very powerful card and very influential in the early game, and eventually it did get nerfed. And that's probably why the beast decks aren't as dominant as they used to be, because they don't have that early removal option that offers both board stability if your creature survives and global removal, so being able to hit anything on the board. But I do remember when this card came out, it was very influential, and blue-green beast was a force to be reckoned with. Now at number 9, we're going to return to an old school card, the Zealous Crusader. This card just keeps coming back. Recently we've had the Mistral Guide Yellow Rush invented by Teddy, and that deck was very powerful, and it still is. You know, Mistral Guide, being able to hurl those creatures down the board. But the reason I chose Zealous Crusader is it's because it's the more problematic card to deal with when Yellow Rush gets going. So Yellow Rush now has many ways to interact with the orb, which inherently buff the Zealous Crusader. So stuff like Barren Sky Vermin, you know, the Demonic Salmon, all these little hasters and creatures that hit the orb made Zealous Crusader very powerful, and actually it has been nerfed. It's now a 2/2 instead of a 3/3, which has, you know, kind of calmed Yellow Rush down, but we always see Yellow Rush return, and Zealous Crusader is always a culprit in making the deck very powerful. At number 8, we have Frog Tosser. Frog Tosser has been a staple in blue-green for a very long time, from the jump variants to the more mid-range variants. With a beast, you can include Frog Tosser in there, but also the ramp variants as well, which was very dominant during the Oversky. So Frog Tosser has been a staple removal option for blue-green since the Oversky's release, and it's still being used today. And it's still very influential. It is a global removal creature that has the potential to survive once it kills its target and create a 2/2 jumper wherever its target fell. So you can have potential tri-collection, more influence on the board with the 2/2. Not to mention that in blue-green you get access to power-ups like Elderwood Embrace, but also the powerful Aurora Mythmaker to make some very strong plays after a Frog Tosser. So going into number 7 is a card that has been nerfed as well, and that is the Gift of Steel. Now, Gift of Steel is one of the most powerful cards in the game, mainly because of its stat increase, +3/+3. That was a very kind of solid stat line, but I think the thing that tipped the card over the edge was powering up the combat creatures that return Faeria, so the Underground Boys, as I like to call them. And when this card was a free Faeria 3/3 event card, it was actually better than all of green's power-ups, and green is the power-up color. Just remember, that's part of its identity. So there's no surprise we did see this card nerfed eventually, and when that happened, Red Combat fell off considerably. No one was playing it anymore. And we did have the return of Underground Boss. So Underground Boss was nerfed first, and then Gift of Steel was nerfed. Red Combat kind of died at that point, and then Underground Boss was returned to its original state, and then Red Combat's back. So the Gift of Steel was the big problem when it came to the balance of the archetype, and following its nerf, you don't see much play of it anymore. You sometimes see it in mono red, maybe sometimes in red yellow, but not very often. They just rely on the economy of the Underground Boys combat triggers, getting that 2 Faeria, and the other powerful combat effects in the game. At number 6, we have Manta Rider. Now, this is its pre-nerf state when it had Charge 2. So when Manta Rider had Charge 2, it was an absolute menace. Yellow Tempo was running rampant because you could chuck down a Manta Rider on turn 3 in a double collection position. And with that Charge 2, it can really move around the board using mobility tricks. It could clear something and then have that Manta left over. So the additional mobility that Manta Rider did have was incredibly influential on the Yellow Tempo archetype. And then following the nerf to Manta Rider, Yellow Tempo ceased to exist, much like the Red Combat at the time. And Yellow Tempo is now being replaced by Yellow Flyers, which also uses Manta Rider but has other tricks available to it. It doesn't totally rely on that card's mobility and durability because, you know, being able to clear a creature and have a creature left over is very powerful, looking at you, Frog Tosser. So Manta Rider was a very dominant card throughout the year, making Yellow Tempo a top tier deck. At number 5, we have Fugoro. From the Oversky, he is still kicking about. He is still having a lot of influence on the game. He was incredibly influential in the blue-green ramp decks. He's always been very good in kind of slower mono-blue decks that use Forbidden Library. But in most cases, Fugoro's main tool was to use the Urn of Gabria to gain a Faeria advantage and a hand advantage. So you pay 5 Faeria, you gain 2 Faeria back, and then you draw 2 cards. So you essentially paid 3 Faeria for a free 5 jump, and then you also drew 2 cards as well. But in recent times, Fugoro has developed additional purposes. And I'm looking at Yulani's Medallion. This is the reason why I put Fugoro at number 5. Yulani's Medallion is a nuts card. It's just an insane card. You've seen me play Radiant Structures. I have made 8 Radiances on the field thanks to Yulani's Medallion. I've had 5 Chaoses down. The card is insane. And I would have put Aurora's Creation on here, but I didn't have enough space for it. So I thought Fugoro could cover that option as well because they're quite similar. But yeah, Fugoro currently is one of the most powerful control cards in the game, thanks to its ability to take these really powerful creatures like Chaos, Radiance, Dreamweaver, and just make a board full of them. And it's very difficult for a lot of decks to deal with that. We don't really have a very efficient global hard removal like Doomsday. Like, Doomsday exists, but only Ace of Dawn uses it, so we don't need to worry about it. But there's no other real option. So, Fugoro, for me, number 5, thanks to Yulani's Medallion. Right, and number 4, we have Radiant Scourge of the Oversky, also known as Steve. And this is the pre-nerf state, which I have on screen right now. Right, so the thing with Radiance, design-wise, it completely shut down counterplay that didn't involve cards from hand. So being able to stop your opponent moving and attacking was devastating, because unless you were able to clear Radiance or any other threat from hand, you were not really able to interact with it. You could drop taunts, sure, you could maybe play hard removal like Last Nightmare, maybe even play Frogify's, but usually when Radiance came down in the specific decks it was designed for, it was too late. Dreamweaver was a big culprit in utilizing Radiance this way. Radiant Structures as well, Amoeba's deck, was another one that abused Radiance. And I still think it's a good card, even without the can't attack line of text. I still think it's a very good card, but at least now, if you drop Radiance, it doesn't completely lock out a turn like it used to. If you have a few creatures next to your opponent's orb, they can't just drop Radiance to buy time anymore. Like, you can still push for lethal, or if they go for an aggressive Radiance, you have a few creatures around your orb next to it, they can at least interact with Radiance. So the pre-nerf, this version of Radiance on screen right now is my number 4. It would have been higher, but because it got nerfed quite quickly, I decided to knock it down and consider some other cards for my top 3 spots. Alright, we're getting into the big guns here. Number 3 for me is Leia. Mainly because it's in every deck. I just see Leia in so many decks these days. It's such a good card. It's got a lot of utility. It's flexible. You can pretty much run it in anything that runs special lands. It's a 3/4, which is good stats for its cost. It has Death Touch, which is a very powerful mechanic. And it also does something extra by leaving that taunt structure behind, forcing your opponent to have to deal with it, but also increasing your life if you can trigger the production ability. So Leia is just like an all-round value package for me. Like, she just offers decks so much. And if you can find room for her in your kind of mid-range control decks, just get her in there. She's very powerful. She helps with board stability. She can pressure very high-cost creatures by just slamming it down and making them have to deal with it. She's just very flexible and offers a lot of options when you play her. Right, number 2. Now, number 2 is tricky for me because number 2 was originally my number 1, but I had to think about it and I did shuffle it around. So number 2 for me is Forbidden Library. This card is the best economy engine in the game. There is nothing that quite matches Forbidden Library right now. Now, Feed the Forest is quite similar in design. It's a 5-land, 1 Faeria economy card, but Forbidden Library is a card that snowballs. Like, the thing with Feed the Forest, it's still a very powerful tool, it's a very powerful card, but Feed the Forest has a cost, essentially. Feed the Forest has to sacrifice one of your own creatures, so you either pay for that creature then sack it, or you sack something on board. You need to have a creature on board to be able to use it. They need to have a good life total to get that Faeria return. It also draws you a card, and once it's used, it's gone. That's the end of it. So there's a lot of variables around Feed the Forest that need to be met in order to either make it usable or get the most out of it. Forbidden Library takes 1 turn. 1 turn, that's all you need. If you can keep the library down for 1 turn, you get a return in value. So it's a 1 Faeria 5 special land structure with 2 life. You gain 2 Faeria, draw a card. So it pays for itself and it actually gives you 1 Faeria extra. You also draw an additional card. So you make up for the hand advantage you lost by playing it. So Forbidden Library pays for itself in card advantage and economy. You have 1 Faeria returned. So 1 turn of Forbidden Library is reasonable. It's fair. But every turn after that, it just snowballs out of control. And blue really utilizes this card with stuff like Spell Will, being able to give itself gas to be able to use that additional Faeria. It has these high cost cards like Dreamreaver that make a lot of use of it. Being able to combo certain cards together like Frogifies and any other cards really. Blue just has like good cheap options, good expensive options that utilize the Forbidden Library. Now here's the kicker for Forbidden Library. If you want to kill Forbidden Library, it actually will cost you more Faeria than your opponent had to play it. Now this doesn't include creatures that are next to it. You gotta keep in mind that blue's very good at keeping you away from them. So if, let's say, the most efficient way to kill a Forbidden Library is Emperor's Command, it's not even efficient. You actually lose a Faeria and you match the card. So you have to lose a Faeria to kill an engine that will snowball and be very difficult to deal with. Now there are ways to get around Library. You know, burn decks do very well against it. Hellfire's been cropping up a bit more now, so there's some answers to it. I'm not saying that it's completely uncounterable. Like it can be answered, but you have to consider that if you can't answer it, it gets out of hand very quickly. So Forbidden Library for me is the best resource engine in the game. Like I said, nothing else matches it. Feed the Forest is good, but it's not as good as Library. Library is kind of ridiculous, but yep, that's it. Blue has that power card, and now we're going to move on to number 1. Now remember, Library was originally my number 1, but I decided to shift this guy up to number 1 spot, and that is Garudan, the big boy Gary himself. Global damage-based removal got nerfed this year. Firestorm got changed, so now it does kind of a meteor. It does an adjacent area effect removal in the same way as the Garudan still does 3 damage, but it's area effect. Whereas Garudan is global. Garadan is still global, and Garadan just wins games sometimes. You can just drop a Garadan at the right moment, it wipes your opponent's board, they have no Faeria left, you have a 6/6 flying charge too, in maybe double collection or an aggressive position, and that can be it. That can just wrap games up there. So Garadan, being one of the last global area of effect removal cards in the game, is still incredibly influential. It's still very good in red. It's very good in blue. You can just splash one Garadan and just build 2 mountains at some point and drop that Garadan. It's very good in stuff like Radiant Structures or any kind of like dual tricolor deck that uses red and blue, because you can use Aurora's Creation on it and make multiple Garadans. So Garadan, for me, I think he is the best card in the game. Some players would disagree. I'm pretty sure a lot of players will disagree with this list and not think that my order is quite there. But for me, Garadan has been in Faeria and destroying boards in Faeria since I started playing. So it's a very influential card in the game, in the meta, and unless it gets changed, it's always going to be used. It's just one of those staple legendaries for any deck that uses red. So that wraps up my top 10 cards. What did you guys think of it? Be sure to drop me your top 10 cards in the comments below. I'm very interested in what you guys think. It took me quite a while to come up with this list. I'd have quite a few different options. I had Creation in there. I had Imperial Drain, the pre-nerf version. There were quite a few cards I was kind of umming and ahhing over, but overall, I decided to go with this list. I think this list is pretty solid. But not everyone's going to agree. But that's my top 10 cards of 2018. Right then. Now let's move on to my top 5 decks of 2018. Alright guys, this was another tricky list to put together. I had to consider decks that had been running throughout the entire year and how much influence they had on the metagame. So my first deck is Blue Green Jump, invented by Xged. And this is kind of to cover Blue Jump as well, and sort of to cover Blue Green Beasts. So the Blue Green Tempo mid-range decks, I picked the Jump for this one. I think that had a lot of influence on the game. The Jump variant, the Beast variant, and even Mono Blue Jump have all had their influence on the meta, and we've seen them appear time and time again in competitive events such as the Open Cups and the Seasonal Cups. So Blue-Green Jump, very powerful deck. It kind of fell off towards the end of the year. Yakapult got nerfed. I think that was a big part of it as well, and other decks got support. And we also saw new decks kind of arise, like the Dream Reaver decks we see nowadays. You know, Yellow Rush picked back up. So the deck did fall off, but at its time, it was very influential, and it did help shape the meta. So at number 4, we have Green Yellow Sacrifice. Now, I would definitely consider putting this deck higher, but the reason I've kind of put it in the number 4 slot is because it's a very reactive deck. Not so much in playstyle, but in its position in the metagame. Green Yellow Sacrifice just pops back up every now and then. When the meta is in its favor, it just comes back up and then it starts dominating, and then the meta readjusts, and then Green Yellow Sacrifice disappears again, and then it comes back in and disappears, and that's kind of been Green Yellow Sacrifice's role in Faeria for a very long time. It's incredibly powerful. It's actually one of the most synergistic decks in the game that's ever been invented. Now, I've thought about this deck quite a lot, and you know, there's not many decks in the game where where it has one game plan. Kill your own guys, get as much value as possible, and play the big Soul Eater finishers. This deck is as clean as it comes when it comes to strategy. You know, this is a very solid control deck. It can be very difficult to deal with when it accumulates all that value. Soul Eater even got nerfed to make sure that it didn't gain power when it was on the field. So the devs actually preemptively checked it, and it was still a very strong deck. I'd even recommend playing it now. It's such a good deck, and it does very well against certain matchups. It's a very good tournament pick. It's just a great deck. So Green Yellow Sacrifice is number 4 for me. And number 3, we have Yellow Tempo. And again, I was kind of wrestling with I was wrestling with two options here, very similar to my top 10 cards. So Yellow Tempo was a very dominant deck during the early parts of 2018. Sunkichi and, well, this build is Minokaro, so he actually won a seasonal cup with this. But also Sunkichi did very well with this and won the Runin seasonal cup. So Minokaro won the Aurora Cup, and then Sunkichi won the Runin Cup with this deck in their lineup. And then we saw the change to Manta Rider, and the deck kind of fell off. But during its time, it was incredibly dominant, very powerful, tempo-orientated deck that could snowball out of control very easily, using the Manta Riders, using the events to shift your creatures around the board and removal, and then getting those cheap Colossus down with that dash free and just dashing them down the field and getting that 7/7 next to your opponent's orb. So Yellow Tempo, very powerful deck of 2018. So number 2, this is where I was I'm in an R in where I wanted these slots. I've put Red Combat. Now I actually feel that Yellow Tempo and Red Combat are quite even, but the only reason that Red Combat has been pushed up a notch for me is because it's become relevant again thanks to the change to Underground Boss. And this list is actually a recent list. So you can play this list now, you can try it out. It's being used in the competitive circuit. Red Combat's back, it's not relying on Gift of Steel anymore. I actually really like that about Red Combat now. It doesn't take something that Green has, part of Green's identity, to become powerful. It can actually function on its own and gain its value from the combat triggers. So it's nice to see Red Combat back, and it's nice to see Gift of Steel not being the card that really pushes it into kind of tier 1, kind of S tier ranking. It relies on its own merits of the combat mechanic rather than the card that powered up the combat creatures. And that's how I think combat should be as a mechanic. It shouldn't be based around that one card. It should be about the mechanic itself and the effects it gives you. So I'm very happy that Red Combat is back. We have needed kind of a solid mid-range deck to check some of the greedier decks in the meta. And hopefully Red Combat will do its job and get on with that going into 2019. Alright, to wrap things up for the top 5 decks, my number 1 pick is Mistral Yellow Rush, made by Teddy. Now, I remember when I saw this deck during one of the tournaments. It was the one that Lizard ended up winning. I believe it was the Kaleem's Open, the Kaleem Seasonal Cup. When I first saw this deck being piloted, I was very confused. I was just like, what is going on here? What type of deck is this? I'd never seen the list before. I'd never seen it played. But man, it was something to watch, honestly. The first time watching that deck, I was impressed with how finely tuned this deck is, and the strategy behind it, and the synergy behind the cards. It all just came together. And it's just so powerful. It's such a powerful deck because it can play Rush from your orb, or you can play Rush right next to your opponent's orb. It's a very unique style of Rush deck. And another thing about this deck is I've never seen a competitive community so afraid of a deck. You know, when this deck won that tournament, when I believe Liz and Teddy got first and second in that tournament, everyone was terrified. All the competitive players were like, this deck is too powerful, this deck is terrifying, it's going to dominate the meta, it's going to get out of hand, and everyone was just so afraid, and that led to a Zealous Crusader nerf. So this deck really shook up the competitive scene. It was such a powerful deck, and it still is a very powerful deck, but also such a beautiful piece of deck building as well. The synergy, the strategy, the alternate strategies of being able to play from your own orb and being able to play next to your opponent's orb. So many things came together with this deck. So what a fantastic achievement from Teddy creating this deck. It is Yellow Rush. I know there are mixed feelings on Yellow Rush, but you have to appreciate how wonderful this deck has been crafted. So that does conclude my top 5 decks of 2018. We're going to move on to my top 5 players. Alright guys, the players. Now this was really hard, but I had to create this list based on the stats, the achievements. And I feel that the top two are pretty set in stone. The ordering, I had to decide on what order I wanted, one and two. 3 and 4, I think are pretty good. Like, I think they're pretty solid picks. Number 5 was really difficult because there were 2 players I wanted to put in that spot. And I ended up going with the one, and we're going to go into it. So number 5 for me as top players of 2018 is S of Dawn. Now, S of Dawn has had some great tournament achievements throughout 2018. He won the halftime tournament. He's hit second 3 times in Open Cups, as well as a 3rd place. But he has also had an exceptional ladder performance throughout 2018 and currently ranks at 8 on the Faeria World Circuit. Now, I really wanted to put Mino Caro in this spot as well, because Mino Caro had an amazing start of 2018, but kind of went a bit quiet towards the end of 2018. So I feel that Mino and S kind of bookend each other. We had the start of 2018, we had Mino, who was very dominant, and then we had kind of like the middle to the end of 2018, S started to pick up. So these 2 players do practice together, and they have made decks together. So I did go with S in the end because of the ladder performance and the Faeria World Circuit ranking. That's mainly what swayed my decision towards S, but Mino is right up there with him, and especially following the win at the Cyphers Seasonal Cup on Saturday. Now, that's a 2019 tournament, so I couldn't include it in these top 5 players. I was very tempted, don't get me wrong. If the Cyphers Seasonal Cup happened in 2018, I would say Mino would probably be number 5 for me. But because that was a 2019 event, S of Dawn does take number 5 for me, with Mino Caro kind of 5.5, 5.1. So Mino, I know you've done a fantastic job this year, but I had to give it to S. So S takes number 5. At number 4, we have one of the most consistent tournament performers in Faeria, the man who plays the slowest decks. He plays for the value, he plays for the safety. He is probably the greatest defensive player Faeria has ever seen. This Alva. Alva has had a fantastic year in Faeria. He has had 3rd place, 3 third places in Opens, 1 first, 1 second. He had 2nd place in the Fall of Everlife Invitational, 3rd place in the halftime tournament, and 3rd place in the Blitz. Now, 3rd place in the halftime and the Blitz for Alva is an exceptional result based on his playstyle. Now, Alva is a player who likes to take all the time available to him. He likes to really plan things out. He's a great defensive player. He's very patient. He will wait for the perfect opportunity to defeat you. The fact that Alva can get 3rd place in not only the halftime tournament, but the Blitz tournament as well, where they had reduced timer, is incredible, because it goes completely against one of the things that makes Alva a great player, using time wisely. So even when time wasn't on his side, he was able to get 3rd place in these events against the top players in the game. So well done to Alva this year. You've been fantastic as usual. One of our old guard now in Faeria, one of the players that has been a very consistent top competitor throughout 2018 and 2017 as well. So I look forward to see what you do in 2019. I look forward to seeing more Alva in the future. All right. Number 3 for me is going to be Raizo. Raizo has had such a good open season, getting 2 first place, 3 third places, and a 4th place in the Runins Cup. Now, you could argue that Alva has had better stats, and, I think he has, but I think what impresses me about Raizo is he's been in the scene for quite some time, but we're really starting to see what Raizo is capable of. He's ranked 5 in the Faeria World Circuit. He's rolling up there with some of the best players in the game. He's still building, his competitive experience. He has so much potential going into 2019. I'm really looking out for you, Raizo. this year, sorry, it's actually this year. Looking out for you this year. I think you could do great things in Faeria. You are doing great things right now. Just keep up the good work. Keep getting those results. And we'll see what you're capable of come this year. All right, so on to number 2. Like I said, number 1 and number 2 were set in stone. I just had to decide which way round I was going to place them. So at number 2, we have Teddy. Now, Teddy has had great results this year. He's had 2 first places in opens, a 3rd place in an open, 1st place in the Fall of Everlife Invitational, and 2nd place in the Kaleem Seasonal Cup, and currently ranks at number 1 in the Faeria World Circuit. So Teddy has been an exceptional player throughout this year. He was last year as well. Again, one of the old guard now for Faeria, who has been playing competitively for a very long time. He created the infamous Mistral Yellow Rush, among many other decks. Has been someone who has influenced the competitive meta throughout his time as a competitive player. And I remember when Teddy first came into the scene, you know, he started off really strong. Like, Teddy showed up, started playing, and all of a sudden he was a top player. It was just like that, honestly. So Teddy, you've done a fantastic job again this year. I look forward to seeing more spicy decks from you in the future and seeing how you will shape the meta going forward. All right, number 1. The number 1 spot for my top player of the year is going to have to go to Sunkichi. Sunkichi has been insane. Absolutely insane. I would even argue that Sunkichi is not only the best player in the game, but probably one of the best pilots in the game. Now, Sunkichi, I think Sunkichi has used a lot of decks from other players, but has a way of understanding decks that to a kind of like just that extra level, just pushing himself up a little further with these decks. Not to say he doesn't make his own decks, but he definitely has piloted some of the other creations of top players in the past. But let me just go through his rap sheet here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have 4 first places at opens. We have 1 3rd place at an open and a 2nd place at an open. 1st place in the Blitz Cup and 1st place in the Runin Seasonal Cup. Sunkichi is currently rank 2 in the Faeria World Circuit, just behind Teddy. But I think Sunkichi is the best player in the game right now. His performance over the last half a year has been insane. Just winning open after open after open. Absolutely dominant. And Sunkichi, I think, is in the position to become one of the best Faeria players that we've ever seen. So not a lot of pressure on you, Sunkichi. I do apologize, but I am a big fan of your play. I'm a big fan of your performance. You're very consistent. You're a very hardworking, strong player. And I really look forward to seeing what you're capable of in 2019. So that wraps up my top 5 players. So that concludes my best of 2018. This is my personal opinion. You guys may agree or disagree. Just let me know in the comments below. And don't be afraid to post your top 10s of 5s of the subjects I've covered today. I'd be interested to see if you think of 2018 differently to me. But I think it's been a fantastic year, guys. And thank you very much for supporting the game, this channel, the competitive community, the players, and myself. It has been a wonderful year for Faeria, and 2019 is going to be great. I'm pretty sure of it. So I hope you guys are looking forward to what Faeria has in store for you. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, drop a subscribe to keep up to date of when our content goes live. Be sure to check out my 2 other videos from this week. My neutral yak deck. I love it. I can't wait to play it more and refine it. Give it a go. It's something very different, and I'm sure you guys will enjoy it. We also have Superb Blizzard's Blue-Red Turtle Patrol, a hybrid deck combined in the Blue Sevens package with the Gem Shell and a few red things like Hellfire and Garadan and stuff like that. So yeah, be sure to check that out as well if you want to try a new version of Blue-Red mid-range control. It can kind of play both. So until next time, guys, take care, and I hope you enjoyed my best of 2018.